and welcome. I am Piers, CEO of RDX Works, a core developer of the decentralized finance protocol Radix, a public ledger entirely focused on bringing DeFi and Web3 to the mainstream. Today, we're going to have a chat with Matthew Hine, the Chief Product Officer of RDX Works, about some cool applications that are potentially possible on top of public ledgers. Specifically, I think the purpose of these sessions that we're going to be trying out is going to be pushing ideas that overlap with business applications and Radix engine objects and Scrypto implementations that I think give some really interesting potential use cases or potential business cases that can be built using Web3, using DeFi, and specifically using the Radix stack to make those business applications particularly easy. The idea for this one, it came from a conversation I was having with JSpeak, actually, when he invited me on his podcast. And we were talking about tokenized objects, and he was talking about this idea that it's kind of weird in most NFT marketplaces where if you have an NFT, you kind of have to choose the venue for where the NFT is sold. So you create an NFT token and then you choose to list it on OpenSea, or you choose to list it on Blur, or you choose to list it on, or on your own website. And his sort of point was that kind of doesn't make sense. Like, you kind of want distribution everywhere. You want to have your NFT and you want to be able to list it in as many places as possible. And if someone buys that NFTs at one of the venues, you would expect that NFT to disappear from all of the other venues at the same time. And that actually got me thinking that pattern is something that you see repeated a lot in the real world as well. If you think about how you sell aeroplane tickets or how you sell hotel rooms, what a hotel is doing is they're a venue that have a bunch of rooms. Those rooms have availability, but you can't sell the same room twice on the same night. But you want it to be distributed across Booking.com, against Hotel.com, against Kayak, against, sort of Hopper, like all of these different venues that you can go and purchase. And the same thing for airline seats. An airline wants to sell its airline seats. It has a route, it has a flight time, but it doesn't want to end up overselling those seats, but it wants to have distribution. And this sort of got me thinking about, surely once you have digital objects on top of a public ledger, it should be possible to model something like this, where you can essentially have an object that can be listed in many places for sale, but once it's purchased, it sort of disappears from the other venues. And that pattern actually is incredibly useful for everything from tickets to to physical objects that you might want to sell, to digital objects, like NFTs and stuff like that. And I was wondering if there's I'm wondering what you thought about that.
It's an interesting one because I've heard this from NFT creators occasionally too, because it's like there's this vision of sort of like, wow, finally we have Web3 where I can be a creator and I can monetize my own art, or I can do things like this, and like there's no middleman. I can go straight out there and I can sell these things at the price that I think is appropriate. And then they get into it and they find out, they're like, well, yeah, but actually you're gonna have to go to OpenSea and they're gonna take a cut, and like it's and in some ways it's worse because, like you're saying, we kind of like have the mechanism set up in the real world for this sort of thing. It's sort of like, all right, I'm a creator and I'm going to list this in some places, but everyone understands there's actually one piece of art in the end, or plane tickets or whatever it is. Right. And so it's like, it's like, why isn't DeFi doing this better? Why is it DeFi doing it worse? So it's a really interesting problem. And we're like, if we do more of these, like this is going to be the common pattern, I think, is like what I always like doing with problems like this is trying to break apart, like before you even talk about the tech part of it, like what is the thing you're trying to do here? And like, there's this concept that goes way back to like before Radix, where I used to do consulting, and I talked about business critical objects and actions. It's basically like, what are the objects in your system and what do those things need to do? And this is just business definition, business model, business logic definition. It's not tech related at all. Because usually if you figure that out first, you can more concisely go to what the solution is, especially on Radix, because we really set up Radix to be able to translate that stuff really well. Because I can see, it's funny, like the way you explained it, like I can imagine someone on Ethereum going, okay, so we need to have clearly we need to have a new token standard for this because that's how we solve all problems. It's like now we need to have like a special kind of NFT, and like now we're going to say like, well, rather than having one person own a given NFT, we're going to have like multiple addresses against that NFT. And so like all of them kind of own it, but then if it transfers out of that like for sale state, then it transitions it to like this other state where it's only owned by one person, and trying to like cram all that into the token contract, right? And like because ERC standards are such a difficult thing to get adopted, like there'd be this tendency to be like, well, let's try to like think of all problems in terms of doing it that way, even though, I mean, what I usually find when you take apart these business problems is that there's actually like a diversity of solutions, right? It's sort of like when you're saying something for sale, what is that something? How do you want to have it for sale? What does it mean to sell it and all that kind of stuff, right?
Right. And then you've got all of the extra complex logic that you might want for it as well, which is that, you know, one venue you might want to give a discount to because of their negotiating power, but another venue you might not want to give a discount to. But you want the transfer of the object to, you know, the NFT to only occur if the rule set is met for that purchase on that venue.
Right. And again, this recurs all the time in the physical world with all the examples you mentioned. It's like plane tickets. It'd be like, okay, travel agents, like this travel agent has this access to this price. You only get this set of seats. Like there's kind of some limitations, or like, you know, physical retail even. It's sort of like, you know, Amazon runs a warehouse and they've got just like a box full of toilet brushes, and they've got 15 different resellers that are essentially selling the same toilet brush, but they kind of like, they offer different deals to them based on volume or whatever it is, right? So like, it's kind of this like, you know, for physical objects, it's a retailer wholesaler model. It's there's a warehouse and there's an end retail location. Or for digital things, like you said, you've got like a reseller, and then you have like I don't even know what you call like the airline backend, but you've got like the original, the fundamental owner of the thing, right?
Right.
So it feels like for Radix, and if we try to just translate that into Radix terms, it feels like you could actually do something really quite similar and direct. Because like the thing with Radix always is that like I hate the idea of polluting the thing itself. Like if I'm trying to sell an NFT, I don't want to be like, okay, here's my NFT. It's got all the metadata on it that I care about because this is relevant to the user, but then it's loaded with all this sort of like logic about how the sale of it happens, which is ultimately like the buyer of it doesn't care about that stuff. They just want to buy it, right?
Right.
So how do we separate? This is our mantra that people always hear me talking about, is separating the asset from the business logic. Right. So the asset should be simple, right? Like we just want it to be your NFT, whatever your NFT is. There you go. There's your NFT. The business logic is like, how do you sell it and what's the relationship here, right? So I think if you're talking about, if you want to list this thing on multiple marketplaces, which is what you're talking about, the marketplace needs to understand that concept. Like it's not going to be like a DEX, because a DEX is built around the idea of like there is one pool and I control that pool. Right.
And I wouldn't expect you to, some of that liquidity to suddenly remove. This is much more the retailer concept. There's a thing, it's for sale. If you pay that price, you'll get the thing, unless it's out of stock, and then you won't end up, you know, your money will come back to you, right?
Yeah. So I think you could do this. I'm just going to use the terminology of physical sales because it kind of makes sense to me. But like, it's, you know, if you imagine the warehouse full of toilet brushes and you got a bunch of like not even Amazon.
Does it have to be toilet brushes? Do we actually have to use toilet brushes?
What's something cooler? I've got a
warehouse full of limited edition baseball cards.
Good example, right? Exactly. So there's a warehouse of these baseball cards, and sort of the owner of that warehouse, like the printer of the baseball cards or whatever you want, they say, look, I want to offer these for sale through all these different retailers. And what the retailers do is they can query what the stock is of the warehouse currently. They may be like, okay, I can see that you've got 50 baseball cards. So if someone comes into my store and pays me for one of those things, I can put in an order against that warehouse. They will pull that stock aside for me. They ship it to me and so forth. And then ultimately the user can pick it up. Now, of course, if we're talking about digital stuff, all this can happen instantly, right? It's just be like, so basically if you break it down into the core concept, what you want is a retailer being able to see what is available for sale currently. And then at the time of sale, like the power of DeFi, we should just be able to do this atomically so that the user can make the purchase from a retailer. I go pull the stock from the warehouse according to whatever rules the warehouse has for me as a retailer. And then I get the thing, and then I pass it back to the user. And on the way, I take my cut or whatever it is you want to do. So I think you could do this really nice with components. So like imagine you've got a warehouse component.
Okay.
And the warehouse component would be created by the NFT creator or by like someone that wants to offer this as a service to NFT creators, whatever it is. But you'd have your own warehouse and you'd put all your NFTs into it. And then you would have a method for that warehouse that would say, basically make purchase. And you would set basically your rules for what you can, I mean, because this isn't like a standard, it's just a component. So we could make those rules whatever you want. You could say, let's say we only wanted certain retailers to be able to buy. I don't want people to be able to buy directly from the warehouse. Like you have to go through the retailer, which is a very common pattern, right? In that case, cool, use badges. That's what we have them for. The warehouse, you issue a bunch of badges, you hand those badges out to the retailers, and the retailer is able to, in a transaction, present that badge to the warehouse, allowing them to make the purchase. And maybe you've got individual badges that define which discount you get or which items of stock you're able to get. And this is cool because you can do all this atomic. And actually, come to think of it, like for the user, this is quite transparent because let me take it from the user's point of view, because what they want to see in their wallet is basically, fixed 50 XRD comes out of my account. I send it to the retailer, and then I get my baseball card NFT back. And you can get that because what's going to happen behind the scenes is, and you can put a guarantee on that also. You can say like, I must get one baseball card back and all that kind of stuff that you get. But what happens is when you pass your bucket of XRD to the retailer at that moment during the execution is then calling the warehouse saying, hey, I know I can buy this baseball card from you for 30 XRD. I'm going to pass you that bucket of 30 XRD along with my badge proof that says I'm allowed to do that. The warehouse goes, yep, I still have that stock. That hasn't vanished in the last moment since you checked. So I'm going to return the bucket of, I'm going to take your 30 XRD. I'll return the NFT to you. Now the retailer has it in their logic and it goes, cool, this is great. Like I now have my 20 XRD profit. I return that back to the user, and that's what the user sees in their wallet. So that's all one transaction that I just described. That isn't like a multi-step thing. Like that atomically just happened.
That two components or one component?
It'd be two, right? So you got the warehouse component, and then you got the retailer component,
right? So
which makes sense because like the warehouse sets the rules for like how do you buy wholesale, and the retailer sets how do I interact with warehouses and how do I sell retail.
Right. So from the user's point of view, they're interacting with the shop front component.
Right.
And so just like making this super simple, I'm a NFT marketplace, and there's like Matt with Pipe NFT that's been created series,
which there should be,
right? There should be Matt with Pipe, and it's just launching, and you want to sell it on your website as well. So you've got mattwithpipe.com. And you've got your NFT marketplace, and you've got, Piers's NFTs marketplace. I can't think of a better name right now. And then there's also, Radland. There's also Photon. So then each of those marketplaces have got a marketplace component, a shop component, and that shop component is authorized with the warehouse component. And what
via the badge.
And let's say that you like me a lot, so you've given me a nice like 20% discount on markup, and then the others you've given, let's say, a 5% discount, and on your own one you don't need to give a discount. You sell it at the sort of the list price on your own website, but you're taking up, all of the profit for that, right?
Right.
So then what happens is I set up my front end. My front end knows that it's authorized with the warehouse component. So then that just pulls in all the objects that are in the warehouse and displays that on my front end as being available to purchase.
Right, like the warehouse, you can kind of think of their warehouse as like a shared pool where you'd have a method on to be like, give me the contents of the pool right now.
Right.
Anybody can read that, but it's like you're reading from that pool rather than your own internal pool inside your retailer.
Right. So I as soon as I add the warehouse component, my front end can just pull in everything, and then I can have the available stock listed on my website immediately. I can have the galleries of NFTs, and they can be grouped into Matt with pipe, Piers with jacket, whatever, right? And then you have when someone comes and purchases through my website, let's say that you've said I want the RRP, the recommended retail price. I want the price of this to be let's call it 100 XRD per NFT. Now that will pull through for me. I have to deliver to you at least 80 XRD. Well, I have to deliver to you 80. I can choose what I want to do with that 20%. Maybe I decide to give my customers a 10% discount. So it says RRP 100, cut price 90. But I'm paying 80, so I'll be taking 10 on the difference there. And so then all of this stock will be listed on my website. People will come along to it, and let's say that they decide to buy, so the first person comes in and buys NFT number 1 from the collection via my website. What will happen is the user has come into my website and they've done a purchase action with my website, with my shop component, and the shop component has gone, right, you're paying 90 for this. The user goes, cool, puts 90 into the transaction, transacts with my shop component, which then also calls the warehouse, gets the NFT, delivers the 80 from the customer's bucket of 90 that's been passed across to you. That fulfills the rule set. The Matt with pipe number 1 comes back into my shopfront component and then passes that to the user, but my shopfront component keeps the 10. Is that right?
Right, exactly. And because it's all atomic.
Now for everyone else, number 1 has disappeared, but all of the other stock is available.
Like if you had a different shop front that queried, be like, hey, what's current stock? You'd see that number 1 is now missing. So you wouldn't list that on your website. And also if you imagine 2 different retailers that sort of let's say they got like a purchase for the same thing around the same time. What's the network takes care of this for you, because basically both of them are going to try to okay, there's a transaction that's about to be processed, which is going to lead to me attempting to make a purchase for the same NFT from the warehouse. And whichever one the network processes first atomically gets that NFT, and therefore when the other goes through, it tries to call the warehouse, and the warehouse goes, sorry, you missed it. You're trying to purchase one that I don't have anymore, and so that one would fail.
And what's really interesting in this, I suppose, is that you as the person who just deposited the collection in the warehouse can presumably change the prices that you expect for those NFTs dynamically as well.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the cool things about going back to the thing about an ERC standard. It's sort of these things tend to get very prescriptive about here's the way in which we can use this. Imagine this being used, and if you have a different use case, get your own standard. Whereas in this case, it's you could set up the warehouse to look for all sorts of things. I mean, it's the warehouse needs to have. Yeah, I mean, you can set arbitrary rules for who can purchase, how much. We're about to have allowances, which will make this really interesting too, because allowance would allow you to kind of do some special things for, it would allow you to even sell non-transferable NFTs potentially, because you'd be able to get an allowance to pass that through. I don't know. It's a lot more flexible because you're not changing the object itself.
You could have a warehouse model for soulbound tokens.
Yeah, I think so, because the warehouse, if you're the creator creating the warehouse, you would be the one that ultimately holds the right to transfer the thing. And so you would provide, let's see.
You provide.
Well, you might even have to use allowance in that case, because if you have the right, you
just had to provide the transfer. Right, control.
Because it never touches another vault. You just transfer it in a bucket. It goes back to the retailer. The retailer still has it in a bucket, hands it back to the user. They deposit in their vault. Now it's non-transferable. So you could totally do it.
The power of the power of the bucket is that it's a transitory state, but it can be passed between multiple smart contracts during that transitory state. I never even.
And you can move bucket
to
bucket. Yeah. When we say soulbound, for us, it's actually, we have these transition rules on basically when can the token leave a vault and when can go into a vault.
Yeah.
Because that's really the thing that's important. So non-transferability is mostly only certain people have the ability of pulling it out of the vault. Well, the warehouse goes, cool, we pull it out of the vault because we're allowed to, and then we pass it back, and then the ultimate buyer of the thing is the one that puts it in their account and then it's stuck there.
That's really interesting. How about like rule sets that you might want to as a creator create, which is like, let's say if you own more than 3 of my NFTs, then you automatically get a discount via the shop front.
That's interesting. Yeah, because you could do a pass-through discount on this.
The proof, right? You could do a pass-through.
Right. Yeah. Well, yes and no, because we protect proofs,
Okay.
but this would actually be a place where an allowance would be, I think, a thing to use, maybe. But basically, like in concept, though, there's a detail. But yeah, the idea here is you should be able to get proof from the end buyer that, like, hey, right now, as of this transaction, I own these 3 NFTs, and then you might end up doing like a pass by intent thing. I don't know. I'd have to think about this, but basically, you could provide that proof, and the warehouse would go like, all right, I can see that involved in this purchase is someone that has these 3 NFTs. Therefore, you can do that. Now, you got to be a little bit careful, because now you could have the thing where you could have like multiple people sort of participating in the purchase and contributing their proofs, even though it's like not one person. It's basically like a Sybil attack sort of thing.
Yeah.
So you'd have to do some stuff around that. But I mean, again, these are all very solvable problems. And It just really depends on like what's important to you. Like when you say one person has to own these 3 NFTs, what do you really mean by one person? Does it just mean like, I just need to know that those are there in the purchase? Does it mean like, no, it has to be in one account? Like there are tools to do these sorts of things.
The thing that this also solves, and this is going to be like really niche, but it's a really broad problem. Like one of the things that public ledgers solve really well is race conditions. And one of the big problems that all of these traditional systems I've talked about, ticketing systems, booking systems, sort of purchase systems have, is race conditions that constantly are going on. Like everyone who is watching this video will have experienced the thing when you're on a website booking app and you go to book it and it tells you what the price is, and you go to put in your card details and it goes, sorry, it's not available at that price anymore. You're like, what are you talking about? You like literally got me all the way through to putting my card details in, and at this point you're going, no, it's not available. You completely get rid of those problems. And like airlines have these problems where they end up double booking seats because of these race conditions. 2 things went through when they shouldn't have done. I think
the airlines know what they're doing. Like the airlines, they book double book seats on purpose for sure, because they assume that some of them are going to be. I mean, honestly, like
it doesn't happen in Europe as much because you get quite penalized for doing it. But yeah, in America, I see this all the time where people are like, I'm not allowed on the flight. What?
And the airline system, like they worked really hard to get this sort of atomicity, basically. So like this is, I finally remember the name of this, Sabre. So the airline system is called Sabre, and it's basically this, like, it's probably written in like COBOL or something. Like it was created in the 70s or something like this. But basically it's this system.
It was created in the 70s. Sabre.
Right.
Sabre.
And it's
someone was watching way too much. What was it? Not Mad Max. What was the one? Was By the Power of Grayskull? What was that?
He-Man. Yeah. He-Man. I think this might have actually predated He-Man. But yeah, it's like they created this system that's basically, it was just like, well, we have to have some way that we can allow travel agents to book things and not have the airline, like to do this. And so they have this system with like this, it's a terrible system. Like everyone I've heard that interacts with it, it's like it requires this like horrible interface because it was built forever ago. But they can't change it because like this defines, it's basically their public ledger, except it's a private ledger. And now we can do this in a way where it's not sort of locked to this proprietary system. Like the network, this open utility provides this function, and you can just define the logic you want. Because sometimes sometimes it's basically like the warehouse goes, look, this isn't sold until it's actually sold. I'll show you that it's available right now, but until you make the purchase, it's still there. Or you might want to have, maybe for your business, you want to have the notion of putting a hold on it. It's sort of like it's pre-sold or something like that. Or basically like the authorized badge can kind of go like, hey, I've got a customer here. They put it in a cart. Please put it in it. Like, I'm not buying it yet, but please put it in a different vault. Move it to a different place inside the warehouse. Don't list it for sale to anybody else. But I'm only allowed to keep it there for for the next 10 minutes or something like that. And after 10 minutes, if it's not purchased, the warehouse automatically puts it back in a general stock again. It can enforce all that anonymity. Like, you don't have to have like this sort of proprietary logic. It's just sort of like, okay, at any given point, the asset is where it is, and the rules of that must be respected. There's no such thing as double selling it. There's no such thing as double listing it or whatever like that. So yeah, I mean, it's like a lot of variations on this. I can imagine it's quite cool. Which is kind of the, you know, to get to this, like one of the purposes of these videos, like you and I have these conversations frequently, and they're always really fun of like digging into applications. But then I never have time to go off and write up these use cases and get them out there. But you know, we're going to be publishing these videos, and I think it'd be really cool to see our community pick these things up and kind of go, oh, hey, there's something here. You can do it really elegantly on Radix, way better than some ERC standard. You cannot, I mean, looking at this sort of warehouse retailer thing with the badges, like, you know, like Austin could kick this out in an afternoon. I'm going to call out to Austin because he did the cool thing on ERC 404. But like, you know, we've got a bunch of people in our community that could knock these things out. And as we saw with Austin's ERC 404 thing, it's like once he built the components, someone else built a front end to it to demo it, and it kind of took on its life as a loan. Then there's an ICE token, you know, like this stuff. This is basically how we show the world that Radix is the best place to build this stuff. Right. So it's like, you know, we want to kind of put these things out here in terms of like, there's an interesting application here. Here's an idea of how you might implement it. I'm sure other people will think of even like better, more interesting, elaborate ideas for doing this. And, you know, we're hoping this gives somebody a jump start.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the fun thing about crypto in general is you get to play with these ideas at very early stages, and highly like recommend that the community has a play with this. I think that there are going to be some really powerful applications that can emerge from these patterns. It'd also be really cool to see the sort of the NFT marketplaces use this standard as well, because the multi-listing of NFTs is just better for everyone, right? It's better for everyone, because then you don't end up in the situation where like people get to every NFT marketplace as a result gets a lot more stock, gets a lot more options in which they can sell to people. And then you get to pick your favorite NFT marketplace, and you know that you can always go there because it's always going to have the things that you want that are in stock. You don't have to be like, oh, now I've got to go over to this one, or now I've got to go over to that one, and yeah.
Yeah, and then and Amazon has proven that there's a really good business model for basically going, we are a retailer, but we also do the warehousing, where it's like, you know, I can imagine somebody setting up a warehouse component, kind of offering this as a service, making it super easy for creators to basically, all right, warehouse here, but we've set this up with an open interface so that other retailers can list out of the warehouse. But you provide a service of providing them that exposure. So it's like you get more creators because they're more interested, like they see more potential, so you get more people doing cool things, and it just creates for a more dynamic. I mean, there's a reason why we see these things in the real world. It's just that on public ledgers, we can do this cheaper, more efficiently, with more access, like all the things that DeFi and Web3 are supposed to be about.
I mean, one of the really interesting, one of the DeFi download interviews that stuck with me most recently was the Boson Protocol guys, who what they're doing is they're going to all of the retailer back-end system creators, so things like WooCommerce, Shopify. There'll be a bunch of others that I'm forgetting, and adding in this component that allows the shop owners to tokenize their stock, and then have a way in which people can then purchase that stock from those shop owners via a Web3 interface. And I think that system is a really interesting like prelude to this idea of everything being available to transact via public ledger using, but it sort of it manages this problem of dual listing by the fact that it's integrated with the stock management tool, right? So I have my stock management tool, and it goes, okay, well, it's been sold here rather than there, so I'll decrement the stock. And you got that stock management tool that does that, but you still don't have the opportunity in the same way to have that object that's been tokenized then to be listed in many venues within the Web3 space. You still have that, the number of stock units you have are the number of stock units you have, and then you have to choose to stock, where that sits in your different Web3 retailer system. Whereas with this, you can go, well, it sits in the warehouse, and then you have multiple venues that can sell it.
Yeah, it's like the whole thing is if you're trying to pull, if you tokenize everything, like you said, this idea of like tokenizing everything that's out there, any kind of asset, from very abstract things to very concrete physical objects and everything. Like as soon as you do that, if you're in like the superpower of an open DeFi platform like this is that you have a common set of tools, a common set of applications that can interact with these things. So once you've tokenized it, now it's sort of like, you can do things like list it on marketplaces where you can kind of find its own price, or you can have derivatives, or like there's all these things you can do around objects that previously were kind of impractical to do those things with, right? It's like you can imagine Amazon having floating pricing for their backstock and crazy things that we'll get to do in the future. Right. But the thing is, like, if you want to do that, you really, I feel very strongly that you don't want to like have to like, okay, well, when we tokenize, we're going to have to build these things in a very different way. That's kind of like, well, decentralized ledgers are hard to use, so you're going to have to create new token standards that build this business logic in. It's like, to me, it's like it's tokenized. There's two parts to tokenizing. You tokenize the asset, but then you also need to model the business logic on the decentralized ledger and do it in the same way. Like, your business logic is separate from the objects that are in your warehouse. Right. And you could do the same thing here, right? So you just sort of like, the business logic has been well refined over many, many years. Like we know what the business model is. We know how things should do. Model that as components that have certain rules, that have authorization to do certain things, that can move just like we have in the physical world, but now atomic, efficient, interoperable, all these wonderful things that we've got. I think really powerful concept.
It's also a lot more flexible to do it like that. You have the object, and then the object has a system by which the transfer of that object is controlled. But then all you need is the right for that system to set the conditions on which the object is transferred. But the object itself doesn't have to have any of the logic.
Which is done all the time in the physical world. It's just the fact that usually this is really laborious to do, but it's required. It's like freight factoring was another one that I worked on at one point, where it's like this idea of like, okay, you've got a shipment from one place to the other, but basically like you don't want to take the risk that something goes wrong in the shipping, and so there's this like other provider. But basically, after talking to these people, there's this enormous amount of paperwork that goes into basically just sort of representing who has responsibility for who has responsibility for the object being shipped at what point in time, and if something goes wrong, like what payment needs to happen, basically. I'm simplifying it. But it's like these things, like they put huge margins on these things for retailers because that costs a lot of money. Like we could do a whole freight factoring thing. I won't go into it, but like this, like the fact that we can just say on Radix, we can just say like, oh, ownership is a badge. That badge has certain rights, and those things can be expressed atomically in a transaction is just unbelievably powerful because it just blows away a bunch of complexity that you normally have in these systems while still leaving the fundamental business logic intact. You're not doing business in a different way. You're just doing it way better, 100 times better.
Right. The word I was searching for was INCO. You're talking about INCO terms, right? You have this standard, like international shipping standard for the different types of like freight left at port. Like there's like pre over the bow and post over the bow, or over the I can't remember what they call the railing down the side of a ship, which is bad.
You're British. You should all the nautical terms should just be
I know, they should just like come to me. It's fine. I've repressed that part of my history. For those who have no idea what I'm talking about, my family is a very boating family, but I get very seasick. So a lot of my childhood was spent just in boats being miserable. I think that the way in which people build in sort of the Ethereum Solidity space, and actually on every other public ledger that doesn't have sort of the separation between the Radix engine and Scrypto, it becomes so simple to put all of the conditional logic to do with the asset inside the asset definition itself.
Right.
because otherwise you'd be building 2 smart contracts, and that just feels like a lot more effort than just putting it into 1 smart contract. Whereas on Radix, you're saying, no, there are these enshrined objects. Those objects are objects. And then you have this set of business rules that may apply to the object maybe just once in its life, maybe just at the point it's transacted for the first time, or you may want to completely change the set of rules for the next time it's transacted, which then it should be, should be linked to a different smart contract for a new set of rules. So you need this way in which you go, the object is the object, like a physical object in the real world. There are no transfer rules associated with this, but I might choose to apply some transfer rules, or if I list it on an exchange, a watch exchange, or a watch marketplace, they may set terms, payment terms, delivery terms, escrow terms, all of this kind of stuff, and so then you have the business rules associated with the transaction of the object. And I think that's sort of so core to what Scrypto and the Radix engine does, and so powerful.
And this warehousing concept, I think, does apply to a lot of these different kinds of traditional systems. Like if you think about a container ship as an example. This was another one that I looked at a long time ago, where it's like you've got a container ship that basically it's like you have a freight line that runs the ship, and they're trying to pre-sale slots on the ship before it arrives in harbor. So there's a whole bidding process on that. So basically it's like, okay, they have a warehouse of slots. They can tokenize those sorts of things. Then you can redeem those later for a slot on the ship, and then you can pass. And then inside then you have a container on the ship. Each container is owned by a company, and it's sort of loaded with a bunch of assets, and those assets have different people that have different levels of ownership for those things, and then they get shipped together, and you get the freight factoring that happens. You need this ability, all of these things basically become sort of warehouses where I am the owner of this warehouse, and I'm the owner of how you can buy things from this warehouse, and and there are always agents involved in these systems. And it's not just because people want to sort of inject themselves to make money on being originally there's a reason why you needed to have a transfer agent or a retailer or a reseller.
Distribution is almost always
distribution,
the answer is distribution. The shipping company ultimately doesn't care who owns the container. They're just I am sailing a ship. It's got 200,000 container capacity, and I'm going to be sailing it back and forwards between America and China every 3 weeks, and I need it to be full. Right. And beyond that, I don't really care. It just needs to be sold. But the number of things in which you can buy, that you need container space on is massive. And, there are entire massive arbitrage markets just on this, where people resell container space. They'll buy up a bulk of slots, and then they'll resell those slots, and then those slots will be resold on again, and then they'll be resold on again. And you'll get down to the smaller and smaller container brokers. And, you can model that perfectly using Scrypto and the Radix engine and this warehousing idea, because the original warehouse is the shipping is the company who owns the ship for those slots. And then once that slot has been sold, the shipping company's happy. There may be some conditions in terms of what can actually be put into the container. There'll be conditions about freight type and all this kind of stuff. But ultimately, that whole system that is massively inefficient. I don't think anyone who hasn't, got involved in shipping or got involved in factoring or got involved in insurance will really appreciate how inefficient these systems are, because you don't have this single source of truth for which things can be turned into programmable objects and passed around. And ultimately,
and you basically end up recreating the same functions in these little siloed systems over and over again. It's sort of we need this, we've got a container ship, and we need this ability of basically being able to sort of bid in an auction on slots over time. It's sort of you're just recreating something that's been done for a million other asset classes, but you're gonna have to build your own system because that's how things work. But now it's just use a DEX blueprint, or use whatever you want. The same tools are available on the same network.
Right. Yeah, I think it's really exciting. So yeah, this as Matt said, this is an experiment. of us, me and Matt, spending a bit of time talking about cool potential applications, potential like build patterns, design patterns that we think are particularly powerful or interesting to have a chat about. We'd love to get your feedback on whether or not you guys want to see more of these, and we'd love to see, if people in the community pick this up and play with it and see where it goes. But yeah, it was really awesome talking about it. Is there anything else that you wanted to mention before we go?
No, this is cool. Looking forward to the next one. Next one, we'll have to do something that's like a little DeFi. Like I want to do something like, what's the hot thing going on? We'll have to find some of those. But I've got this whole backlog of interesting things to talk about. So
awesome.
It'd be cool.
All right, Matt. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, everyone, for watching.